ETprepper. I'm going to be reading a article from Dr. Martin D. Weiss. He titles it The 5 Black Swans. So I'm going to point out the 5 black swans that could potentially devastate us. The U.S. stock market, the U.S. economy, and virtually the entire world are now vulnerable to a series of black swans. Now here's the definition. Powerful forces that strike out of the blue and swoop down on financial markets with potentially devastating impact. By definition, the actual events themselves are unpredictable. If we could somehow know they were coming ahead of time, they wouldn't be a true black swan in the first place. The conditions that give rise to black swan events are visible in plain sight. Here are 5 prime examples. Example number 1, the collapse of Fed's QE. QE is quantitative easing. And if you remember, over the course of the last several years, they have added trillions of dollars to our economy just by pumping that money in through the bank. That has in turn made our economy very dysfunctional. Let me explain what $1 trillion is. $1 is one. $100 is $100. $100,000 is $100,000. $1 million is 1,000,000. $1 billion is 1,000 million. $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. That is a lot of money. And it takes a long time for us to pay that back, if ever. We're to the point now where we can't pay our national debt back. That's another problem for another generation, I guess. Not true. Let's go on with the black swan number 1, the collapse of Fed's QE. The Fed's quantitative easing, newspeak for money printing, has without a doubt been the most single powerful force behind the post-debt crisis recovery. That's the collapse of 07 and 08, 09. No other government rescue operation, not even the gigantic bank bailouts under the Bush or the economic stimulus plans under Obama, came close to the Fed's QE in terms of sheer impact on our world. No other country or region in the world, not even Japan or European Union, printed money in greater amounts. In the wake of the Lehman Brothers failure in September 2008, the U.S. Federal Reserve went stark raving mad, abandoning any semblance of restraint and expanding its assets by a mammoth $3.6 trillion, all the while shoving interest rates to the mat and holding them at near zero for 7 long years. As long as QE continued, the U.S. stock market rose. But as soon as it discontinued, the stock market froze in its tracks, going virtually nowhere ever since. What happens when the investors and corporate decision makers suddenly realize that QE and zero interest rates aren't working anymore? What happens when the music stops and this free money party comes to an end? We can't predict how or when the QE bubble will collapse, but we know 2 things. No nation in history, let alone the United States, has ever experienced anything like this before. And ultimately, all the free or cheap money in the world can't buy essential ingredients every modern economy must have to sustain itself: confidence, savings, and capital. Which leads us to black swan number 2. Disappearing capital expenditures. Put yourself in Fed Chairman Janet Yellen's shoes. Ever since Economics 101, you've learned a thing or two about capitalist economies. You've learned they can't survive without capital investment. In other words, unless businesses invest in new plants, new equipment, new technology, there can be no future growth. You've also learned that as soon as corporations begin to cut back on those investments sharply, a major economic decline could be near. Just something to worry about another day? Heck no. Last week, soon after your latest monthly meeting, with the Fed Open Market Committee, you learned one more thing. In the just ended first quarter, capital expenditures by U.S. corporations suffered their first major plunge since the Great Recession. How is that possible? How is that possible, you ask? Didn't we give the big banks tons of money practically for free? Yes, we did. Your cohorts respond in unison. Didn't we get businesses to financially start borrowing that money? We did, your cohorts respond in unison. Don't we get businesses to finally start borrowing that money? We did, the chorus. Then what the hell went wrong, you query with growing frustration? Answer, instead of investing that money, many companies decided to recycle it. Financially, used it to buy back their own shares, artificially goosing up their prices. Folks, this is where the real problem lies, is the government expected the bankers to do what was right, but in their greed, they said, let's all invest in certain things and certain commodities, and that's where the economy grew very dysfunctional. The other day in China, for some reason, many of the banks decided to invest in cotton. Well, they bought so much cotton that they could make 9 billion, that's with a B, pairs of jeans. That means one pair of jeans for every man, woman, and child on the planet. They invested so much in cotton, and they spiked the price of cotton, and of course it's going to crash. It's dysfunctional when you get free money. So that's the problem. Okay, here we are facing corporate bankruptcies because we're so dysfunctional. And let's continue on. Throughout history, black swans have been most likely when social imbalances are most extreme. And right now, the U.S. suffers from the biggest concentration of wealth in 100 years. The richest 1,000th, that means 0.01% of America's households, have more than tripled their share of the nation's assets. And the richest 1/10 thousandth have increased their share sixfold. So this is not just a problem for the poor, nor is it an issue limited to the nation's middle class. It also may be hindering hundreds of thousands of higher net worth investors from growing their portfolios. When the controlling interests of the nation's big corporations with companies' massive stock buybacks that crowd out dividends, the super rich are now squeezing the rich. Again, dysfunctional. The chart tells us the story in a nutshell. The black bars show how the wealth concentration has reached such an extreme and is now worse than it was in 1929. Meanwhile, the red line shows the political polarization in the United States. Again, the last time it peaked was in 1929. And now it's even worse. There are two dark clouds hovering over America today. The preconditions for massive social and political battles that can disrupt the economy, causing financial markets to go haywire. They are plainly visible preludes to black swan events in American politics. It could be mass street protests surrounding the Republican and national conventions this summer, a decision by the Justice Department to indict Hillary Clinton, perhaps the emergence of a stronger third party in America, or more likely, something that no one can predict, and they are plainly visible preludes to black swan events in American politics. Black swan number 4, chaos in China. When U.S. analysts look at China, they focus almost entirely on the economic numbers, and those are indeed getting worse. But if a major black swan event emerges from the Middle Kingdom, it's likely to be driven primarily by something that's mostly off the radar screen, such as widespread popular revolts. Two major causes. One, mass forced evictions disrupting millions of households, and crippling pollution, a daily nightmare in the lives of hundreds of millions. The ensuing black swan events could cause a collapse not just in the Shanghai stock market, not just in the Chinese economy, but also in the Chinese social order. The impact on global financial markets? Largely unpredictable, but potentially enormous. Black Swan number 5, nuclear terror. In March, the Harvard Kennedy School published a landmark study on nuclear terror, delivering good news and bad news. The good news is that major progress has been made in safeguarding nuclear warheads. The bad news is that massive amounts of radioactive material are widely available in hospitals, research centers, and nuclear plants, which are not yet secured. Moreover, according to the same study, the Islamic State is the first terror group in history with both the resources and the desperation to embark on such an attack. All right, folks. Those are some serious black swan events that are potentially headed our way. Then we have the natural disasters which could come at any time. Earthquakes being widely talked about more and more regularly. You can see one of my videos about that that the mainstream news did a piece on. Very informative and very scary, talking about wiping out Seattle and so forth. Then you have Yellowstone, the supervolcano. They're watching me. So folks, there's a lot of perils headed our way. Please be thoughtful when you move forward, and you need to have plan A, B, C. Where are you going to go if your house is burned down or taken over or who knows what? You got to start thinking these macro thoughts. If you're not, if you're going to be just fine in your neighborhood, chances are you're not going to be just fine in your neighborhood. So folks, I hope this information, one, causes you to think about the economic part of our world and how fragile and dangerous things are right now. It seems like everything is coming together to a crescendo. Doesn't it seem like that to you? Give this some thought, folks. Have a great day. Thanks.